love that held back madness. The history of Eastern Europe is one of force, often brute, heavy, iron-bound. And yet, even here, beneath the tolling of bells and the clash of sabers, destinies turn not by the sword, but by the heart. Especially when that heart broke. Child of chaos. In the cold chambers of the old Kremlin, where winds howled through stone cracks and candles trembled not from drafts but from unspoken fears, a child was born, Ivan, son of the Grand Prince. The year was 1530, and from the very moment of his birth, fate offered not a cradle but a cage. His father died when he was 3. His mother, poisoned, they whispered, vanished from his life at 8. In her place came the boyars, wolves in brocade, more interested in crowns than cribs. He grew up not with lullabies, but with screams muffled behind doors. He learned of love only through its absence. The servants who showed kindness were dismissed. The ones who didn't stayed but bruised. Ivan watched the world through a warped mirror, where every face looked false and trust was a word for fools. Survival was not taught in books, but carved into him by hunger, humiliation, and silence. By 15, he was an old man in a young body, all edges and suspicion. No games, no joy, only suspicion, hunger, and an early fascination with destruction. And yet, deep beneath the frost, a tiny ember remained. If only someone could reach it. And fate, ever a fickle guest, extended a hand. Not often, not generously, but just once and just enough. Anastasia, breath of peace. When Ivan turned 17, and the throne was finally his, they paraded young noblewomen before him. Not for sport but for statecraft. Daughters of the mighty, nieces of ambassadors, beauties whose names filled foreign courts. Yet he chose Anastasia Romanova. A quiet name, a quiet woman. Not the most powerful nor the most dazzling, but soft-spoken, kind-eyed, and luminously still. And with her something strange happened. Ivan calmed. The boy who had studied pain began to study law. He issued reforms, built churches, summoned councils. His anger, once volcanic, cooled into calculation. And everywhere, in quiet corners of the court, they whispered, "As long as she lives, the Tsar remains a man, not a storm." Anastasia ruled not with decrees but with presence. She did not argue, she soothed. When Ivan brooded over betrayal, she offered perspective. When rage surged, her gaze alone brought him back. She was not a shield. She was the gravity that kept the planet from spinning off into ruin. Even the chronicles noted her hand in governance. By the word of the Grand Prince, and with the blessing of his wife, a more just court was established. And the people rejoiced. To the boyars she was a puzzle. How could mere gentleness halt a tyrant in the making? To the people she was rare sunlight over the Moskva. And to Ivan she was an anchor. Subtle, invisible, but the only thing holding back the sea. Death that unleashed the storm. In 1560, the silence of tragedy returned. Anastasia fell ill. Not dramatically, just weariness, pallor, then stillness. Some blamed superstition. Ivan, ever faithful to the darkest possibility, blamed poison. His rage was not political, it was personal. And once she died, the man unraveled. He screamed, locked himself away, pored over books of curses and heretics. He did not mourn, he seethed. And out of that seething came something new, the oprichnina. He split Russia like a surgeon with a cleaver, the clean and the infected. He donned black robes, gathered black riders, and rode through towns like judgment itself. Where once he passed laws, now he passed sentences. Where once he held councils, now he held executions. The oprichniki wore dog heads on their saddles and brooms on their spears, to sniff out treachery and sweep it away. Heads rolled. Towns burned. Fear settled across the land not as an exception, but as law. Even the angels, it was said, paused at Russia's borders asking, "Is the Tsar in good spirits today?" Then the final descent. In a fit of rage, Ivan struck his own son. The air fell, and with him, the last glimmer of human restraint within the father. The beast had always been there. But while Anastasia lived, it had been chained. Now the chain was broken. What if? History favors blood, it sells better. But imagine, for one absurd moment, that death stumbled. That in 1560, Anastasia recovered. A miracle, perhaps. Or just luck. But she lived. And Ivan, blessed, relieved, returned to her side and, with her, to sanity. No oprichnina. No black robes. No dividing the land like spoiled bread. Instead, zemstvo councils, educational reform, local justice, elected advisors. A monarchy not of terror but of law. Imagine the Tsar not feared but admired. Imagine Moscow not as a bastion of cruelty but a city of learning. Letters exchanged with Poland. Treaties with Byzantium. Scholars from Italy seeking lectures, not sanctuary. A renaissance not in Florence but in Susdal. The Charter of the People's Council, written not in fantasy but in reality, let the people participate in governance, through advisors elected by merit and mind. Let this council be constant henceforth. With no bloodthirst, there is no Smuda the time of troubles. With no Smuda, the Romanovs never rise. With no Romanovs, Russia becomes not an empire of snow and steel, but of scrolls and stars. Yes, history is not kind to what-ifs. But sometimes between the sword and the scepter, the world might have been changed by something as simple as one more day of life. Centuries passed. Towers changed their outlines, coats of arms their owners, and thrones their shapes. But one thing endured, the shadow of Anastasia. Not a ghost in palace halls, but in a question whispered by history itself. What if? Her name survives not in glory, but in margins. A paragraph in textbooks. A kind smile in folk tales. She led no battles, issued no manifestos, claimed no revolutions. Her weapon was patience. Her palace a heart. Her victory, a man kept from madness. Had she lived longer, Ivan might not have become terrible. He might have become great. But history chose grief. And from one woman's death came a river of blood. Oprichnina. Executions. Civil war. Not born of policy, born of loss. Sometimes nations fall not by uprising, but by the absence of a single breath. Had she survived, Russia might have charted a different course of theaters instead of torture chambers, of universities rather than secret police. And perhaps the word Tsar would have meant not terror but honor. Yet that is not history. That is echo. Unwritten in chronicles, unheard in speeches. But anyone who has studied the rise and fall of empires knows, every tyrant once wept for someone. And sometimes in that weeping, one name is heard. Anastasia,